Hello humans, Master Dinnerflex here, bringing you the low quality content you deserve, and today, of all the decks I'm known for, and of all the decks I've tried, this is one you might not know I really enjoy. So, I think, like, the only indication that I've ever enjoyed this deck is, like, on a Farfa video from, like, January of 2019, when I was trying my absolute hardest to get people to realize that Lunalight was broken. I sent him, like, a Table 500 replay that was, It was, like, Lunalight Pendulum Magicians, and the reason I have such a nice fondness for this deck is because Pendulums, even before Electromite, a lot of the times had an identity crisis. They didn't really know what they wanted to be, because Cleafort and Metal Foes, they had their own identity, but when you get to like Performapal and Magicians and certain ones like that, they didn't really. It felt like they were a means to an end to just Pendulum summon, and it felt like that for a long time. And I'm going to say it, and it's going to make people upset, but I think Master Rule 4, while it definitely nerfed the mechanic, it let it stand out on its own of actually being a gameplay mechanic and not just a deck. The problem is we really didn't get to see that because of Electromite. And to put it simply, the reason I think that is because when you could just Pendulum summon everything from the extra deck, it really didn't matter about holding resources or conserving resources. All you needed to do was put Pendulum scales up, so the Pendulum scales never really mattered. Which was a problem for Master Rule 3. And then with Electromite, it was literally the same thing. Because it didn't really matter what Pendulum monsters and what your Pendulum scales were, because Electromite was literally just going to shuffle every single one of them in and out of the main and extra deck, to the point where it really didn't matter what Pendulum deck you were playing. As long as they had their best 40 Pendulum cards, it was going to be good. So why do I like this deck? Well, because without Electromite, this one is one of the very few Pendulum decks, which, to be fair, I think now a lot of Pendulum decks have a lot better identity than they used to, because of both Master Rule 4 and the banning of Electromite. This deck is very unique. It is not like many other decks, but Pendulum decks, I should say, because unlike all of the Pendulum decks where it's about putting your whole hand on the board, and if it doesn't stick, you lose, this one is very much not that. It is a very interesting example of mid-range Pendulums, and that's such a... like, if you're a Trip viewer, you heard that, and your brain probably exploded. But realistically, the reason combo Pendulum decks don't really work anymore, like on the same level when Electromite was legal, is because of the fact that modern Yu-Gi-Oh! You can't throw a lot of cards into going second. Like, you can't, like, summon 5 things and assume, oh yeah, there's no problem here. That is not going to work. But with Pendulum Magician, they actually play a much more reserved game, and if they go to turn 3, it is probably more effective than turn 1. And then it keeps escalating and escalating. So if your opponent failed to win their first turn, you probably won. Which is like, I love decks like that. I love the decks that put so much pressure on board, despite the fact that they are not insanely broken. Like, Burning Abyss is another example. If your opponent cannot break through your Burning Abyss loop, like, very early, they lose. It never changes. So with that being said, Pendulum Magicians are a lot like that. And in addition to that, the Pendulum scales, unlike a lot of other decks, they're not very repeating. Like, with the Metal Foes, they all really have the same effect, outside of, like, some of the newer ones. But instead of just more of the names, it's a massive, massive toolbox. And this massive toolbox they have actually addresses some of the flaws of pendulum scales, where if they get removed, it feels like you lose your entire deck. But not only do they have ways to prevent the scales from just being removed, but in addition, even if they do get removed, cards like Blackfang Magician and Double Iris and Purple Poison will kind of ignore the fact that they just got destroyed. So that's why I really like this deck a lot. But let's just go into the deck list because I've raved on it over and over again. Also, I'll probably leave a link to that Farfa video. And maybe even the timestamp if you want to look at what I was talking about. So, we got triple Harmonizing Magician. Now, this is probably the most important thing to Pendulum Summon in the entire deck. You can't Pendulum Summon it from the extra deck. And it cannot be used as a material for anything except links unless the other material is a magician. That is a very relevant restriction. Keep that in mind. And then, when it's Pendulum Summoned from the hand, which is the only place it can be, you can special summon a Pendulum Magician monster from your deck in defense, except another copy of itself, but banish it when it leaves the field. So effectively, when you Pendulum Summon this, it is a Synchro or an XE monster. We don't have any real fusions to use with it anymore now that the Starving Venom is gone. But like what you can do with this, just Pendulum Summon this, get another guy rank 4 Synchro 8, or even O for a Synchro 10. With this is just very nice. Also, its scale effect is that all your monsters get buffed by how many different magician names you have in your extra deck. Then Double Iris, the card that came back to 3, it has a scale effect I don't actually ever use. But it could come up. And then when it's destroyed at all, you just add a Pendulum Graph card from your deck to your hand. So Star Graph and Time Graph. And this is what makes the Time Graph, Pendulum Graph control kind of theory with magicians, is that even if you're like not really performing a lot of summons and you're kind of being held back, if you're just cycling Pendulum Graph and magicians, you're probably going to just take away so many cards from your opponent that once you've resolved like Time Pendulum Graph maybe 2 or 3 times, you've probably just won. Because you've amassed so many resources that once you Pendulum Summon, your opponent has no way to deal with it. So yeah. Iris, Wisdom Eye Magician. Its Pendulum effect, which is its only good effect, is that if you have another Magician or Performer Pal in your Pendulum scale, you can destroy it to switch it with any other Pendulum monster from your deck. Which ideally is like Oath Dragon or Harmonizing Magician, so... Oh, not Harmonizing Magician, like Oath Dragon and any of the high scales like Double Iris. That's its ideal use. And then Triple Oath Dragon. This is why I like Pendulum Magician so much, and why I like the new Master Roll for Pendulums. It's because, like I said, originally with Master Rule 3 Pendulum Summoning, it was just so blatantly broken that you didn't play a normal game of Yu-Gi-Oh! But when you're restricted to Pendulum Summoning only one monster from the extra deck, or like having a whole bunch of Link Zones from the extra deck, that's when it gets very interesting, because it pretty much means you have to play a normal game of Yu-Gi-Oh! With Pendulum monsters. Which I think is what I want out of Pendulums. People want this Wombo Combo 18,000 negate Pendulum deck, but not only do those decks suck, but even when you try to play them, they're just so boring. Like, they don't play a normal game of Yu-Gi-Oh! They just like, let's see if we can spam. Can we spam? Yes, so I'm gonna build a big board. Can we spam? No, I lose. Like, that is so incredibly boring. It's incredibly unsatisfying to lose with it. It's like satisfying to build the board, but once you start doing it over and over and over again, it gets dull fast. But Oath Dragon, the way this card's designed, which is Pendulum effect, is if you have another Magician in your Pendulum zone, you can recycle a Magician or Odd Eyes Pendulum monster from your extra deck. This legitimately, to me, is how Pendulums should have started when you read an effect like this. It very much promotes a game where you're just trying to amass card advantage, which of all the Pendulum decks that have ever existed, they've never been that great at gaining card advantage, which is why, like, in Master Rule 3, Joker Monkey Board were, like, in pretty much every Pendulum deck because they were just so easy. You got so many cards off of it. Yeah, basically that. And then so that's it for its Pendulum effect. And then its monster effect is when it's normal or special summoned, you can target a magician or odd-eyes monster in your graveyard and add it back to your hand. So it just switches locations of where it recycles. Which that is actually, its other effect is actually kind of relevant. Because when you detach for XEs, they don't go to the extra deck. And also, I am playing Chaos Ruler, which means I'm absolutely sending Pendulum monsters to the graveyard, where this guy can just grab them back. Then, triple purple poison, its attack effect is relevant, and then its pop effect is very relevant. Also, it's a low scale, which that's like one of the only real weaknesses of this deck, like in comparison to other Pendulum decks, is that the low scale count is really, really bad. Like, a lot of the times, like, if you don't have Oath as the low scale, it just feels very underwhelming. Triple Black Fang, when it's destroyed, you revive a Dark Spellcaster from your graveyard, and then it has another attack-based effect. Then White Wing Magician, 2 of them. This is a lot, because you either play one of this just as like a weird tuner Garnet, otherwise it's just terrible. But I'm actually playing 2 because I'm playing Fibrax, and it's it's still a level 4. Like, so this is kind of fine. And then Pendulum Sorcerer. Now this one's a little weird, but I am playing 4 Performer Pal monsters, which is 2 Skullcrobat Joker and 2 Celestial Magician. And the reason Pendulum Sorcerer is good is, first off, it's a low scale, which is very relevant. But more importantly, I wanted another card that had a lot of value, like how Pendulum Summoning Harmonizing works. Because Pendulum Sorcerer, when it's special summoned, not just Pendulum summoned, but when it's special summoned, you can target 2 cards on the field, target 2 cards you control, destroy them, and add up to 2 Pendulum Performer Pal monsters from your deck to your hand. So if you pop 1, you grab a 1. If you pop 2, you grab 2. But as we discussed with like Black Fang and Double Iris, destroying your own cards can be very beneficial a lot of the time. Or even just dead cards. Like if you draw 2 Duelist Alliance, you could just pop one of them and go ahead and grab a Performa Pal card. And that leads us into Joker and into Celestial Magician. So when Skullcrobat Joker is normal summoned, it just searches an Odd Eyes, a Performa Pal, or a Magician, except itself. And then Performa Pal Celestial Magician is really interesting because it is both a Performa Pal and a Magician, which is kind of very, very nice. Because it has overlapping names with like Pendulum Sorcerer and then like Oath Dragon. And obviously Time Graph. But its scale effect is when exactly 1 Fusion, Synchro, or XE you control that was special summoned from the extra deck is destroyed by battle or opponent's card effect, you can destroy this card in the scale and then revive that whatever monster. That is actually a pretty good effect, because let's say you have a Baroness and they just destroy it with something, you can just remove this from your scale to bring it right back, which is pretty cool actually. And then 1 Tuning Magician, a card that has always been terrible until the existence of Fibrax, and now it is absolutely insane. This is how this deck can make Hot Red Dragon Archfiend just casually. But in addition to that, it's just like a really nice material that you could just bring back on command. Because I guess like one of the weaknesses of a lot of Pendulum decks is they don't conduct a lot of special summons outside of the Pendulum summon. So having a card like this is very nice. And there's another card in the extra deck I want to mention on that same boat. And then Chronograph Sorcerer. I actually don't think this package is very good. I only play it just because it's like level 6 and like there's Norito and Baroness in here. But for the most part, this card is kind of underwhelming because this deck doesn't struggle with high scales. It struggles with low scales. But Chronograph is pretty much only a high scale, and at that point, it's just it's honestly just like a level 6 monster. There's probably better options than that. But I guess it is like always a magician name, unlike other level 6s. For the spells, Star Pendulum Graph. Your opponent can't target spellcasters with spell cards or effects, and then if a magician pendulum monster like leaves anywhere from the pendulum zone or the monster zone, add any magician from your deck to your hand. That's once per turn, but it's also mandatory, so it can help you generate a lot of card advantage very quick, which is like one of the coolest parts about Pendulum Magician, is that it just generates so much card advantage. Duelist Alliance, it can not only search the pendulum graphs, but it can search Double Iris, and then most of all, it can search Pendulum Sorcerer, which is very funny. And another card it can search is Pendulum Call. Only 2, because this is very much a conflicting starter, which normally you see conflicting starters in like merged decks, like Sky Striker, True Draco, or like in Wind Witch Invoke. Like there's like conflicting starters every now and then, but this one's a little different because this is a pendulum. This is all part of the same archetype, and it has a starter this powerful, but at the same time, it kind of chokes out how some of your cards work, like Wisdom Eye. And in addition, it needs to be pretty early because you can't use any scale effects like Oath Dragon before you activate it. It's just really weird how conflicting a starter this is. Kind of strange. And then, a card. You could probably cut this, but it's called By the Grave. Oh, and by the way, I'm not doing Crossout because I don't know a fucking universe where I'm just casually throwing in 6 hand traps into this deck, and in addition, adding 3 Crossout. That's not something you can casually do with this deck. So, Crossout really isn't an option, unless you're just absolutely fucking insane and want to reduce your deck's consistency so hard that it doesn't work, and your opponent just doesn't need to hand trap you. But that is what it is. And then 2-time Pendulum Graph. It's nice to have the second one. You only really need 1, but it's nice to be able to search one if they remove the first one. Because, like, all of their back row removal is going to target this. Because this is going to... They're going to lose to this card if they don't try to deal with it. And its effect, if you don't know, because this card hasn't been used in a while. You target a magician in your monster zone or pendulum scale and 1 card your opponent controls and destroy them both. However, if the magician you control wasn't destroyed at the resolution of that effect, you just get to send 1 card your opponent controls to the graveyard. That doesn't target and that doesn't destroy, so that's very funny. You could probably... yeah, it's pretty nice. It's also just casually a natural Dragoon. But, outside of that, that's it for the main deck. This deck, I want to say, isn't really finished. Because there's a lot of things I was trying out and I want to try out again. And as you're about to see from the side deck, a lot of it isn't finished because it's a lot of theory. And one of those theories was just blatantly playing Messiah, because it's not good. Like, it definitely doesn't have much synergy with anything. It's just kind of a floodgate against some decks. But the real important part is that it's a scale 0. Like I said, this deck really struggles for low scales. So just having the lowest scale possible, in addition to the fact that it is a floodgate, a floodgate that doesn't really affect you, I think this could have been okay, but I haven't really done much testing, and the side deck's just filled with cards. The only two cards I do want to talk about for this deck is Zeus and Exciton. So, why would I ever bring this up? Isn't Zeus just superior to Exciton? The answer is yes. Zeus is absolutely superior to Exciton. However, in order to put 2 level 4s on board, you pretty much had to Pendulum summon. So if you're Pendulum summoning, that means you have scales. So if you're putting scales on board and a lot of monsters on board, if you Zeus, you lose everything. Yeah, you outed your opponent's board, but you also outed your board. Like, you outed your board more than your opponent would ever dream of. But why doesn't that exist with Exciton? And the answer is Pendulum Call. If you Pendulum Call your scales, and then you Pendulum Summon, make Exciton, you wipe the board, except your scales. Which I feel is, like, way better than Zeus. Because Zeus, because it sins, no matter how many Pendulum Calls you use, your scales go away. The only time Zeus would be, like, optimal is if you just had another set of scales in addition to everything else, and I just don't think that's practical. I think it'll pretty much never happen, whereas the Exciton interaction, I think, could come up a lot more often. So, that's something I just wanted to throw out there. So, let's get into the extra deck. Baroness, it's a little ways away, but this card is absolutely sick in the deck, not even for its negation effect. Not even the negation effect. It's actually not even the revival effect either. Its effect is, once per turn, you can target one card on the field, destroy it. And that's really funny, because it's really nice to have extra deck options that just casually blow up Double Iris Magician. Like, that is actually something very nice for a deck, for this deck to have. So, that's why once we get this, it's always just going to be in this deck. And the way you summon it is, you just Harmonizing Pendulum summon it, and then use Oath Dragon to summon off of it, and then you can make Baroness. Then, Chaos Ruler and Hot Red Dragon Archfiend. So, Hot Red Dragon Archfiend, pretty much anytime you have an easy to summon level 1 tuner and Chaos Ruler in a deck, you play this package. But Chaos Ruler, this is very weird for a Pendulum deck. Why am I playing this? Well, it's actually very simple, and that is the fact that milling cards is nice. Even in Pendulum, because if you look at this, there are a grand total of 3 Pendulum Magicians that are not dark, and of those 3, one of them is light. So, pretty much outside of Oath and White Wing, you just grab back a Pendulum Magician, or a Skullcrabat Joker, or a Chronograph, or a like, you could just grab all of these, but it's not just about grabbing a scale for free in addition to already establishing, but if you mill a Pendulum Sorcerer, that's where it gets interesting, because like I said earlier, this doesn't need to be Pendulum summoned, just special summoned to trigger its effect. And let's say you mill it with Chaos Ruler, and you have the Fibrax and Tuning Magician on board, which is the common board for this. You then turn the Fibrax and the Tuning Magician into Selene. And then Selene, once it gets enough counters to revive something, you revive Pendulum Sorcerer from your graveyard. So, the Chaos Ruler effectively milled a Pendulum Sorcerer for you to then revive, for you to then pop like a Double Iris or Black Fang, to go search some cards, to go search some more cards, and then to continue link climbing. Yeah, that's why this is nice. That's why this is a very nice card, and that's why this is a very nice package. Because even if you don't mill Pendulum Sorcerer, this is just free card advantage. It lets you end on boards of 2 Material Apollousa and Hot Red Dragon Archfiend before you even start throwing in your Time Star Pendulum Graph nonsense. Like, you can actually establish a lot of disruptions with very little cards in this deck. But that's it for the synchros. Oh, Supreme King Dragon Clearwing does like I actually think this is a little better than Ignister. Yeah, it doesn't have the full benefit of Ignister, but at the same time, it's very nice to just regeki your opponent's entire board. I will say, if you are worried about Dragoon, you can just replace Phoenix for Ignister Prominence. There's probably no downside to it. Now, for these next 2 XEs, they're actually insanely important. And this one, you might not think it is, but it is actually very, very important. So, this card's effect, it has a scale effect, and it can put itself in the scale as well, but it's just, its scale effect is destroy it, negate, and attack. But its actual effect is you can attach a material from a card and special summon 1 level 7 or lower Pendulum monster from your hand in defense position. So, that's actually very relevant, because like I said a while ago with this deck, is that it loses a lot of summon power after the Pendulum summon is conducted. Like, yeah, it's like, puts all its eggs in Pendulum summoning, but once you conduct that Pendulum summon, there's very few ways to conduct more special summons. But this is one of them. But now you might ask, well, why does this matter? Because why couldn't you just Pendulum summon what you summon with this? And that's where Oath Dragon comes in. Because let's say you Pendulum summon Harmonizing Magician, Double Iris, another level 4, and that's it. So the Double Iris will go ahead, make a synchro like Chaos Ruler, and then afterwards, the Oath Dragon will recycle Harmonizing from your extra deck. And that's where you could use these 2 level 4s to make Hope Magician, because the Hope Magician can then special summon the Harmonizing Magician from your hand, and then you can, like, link the Hope Magician and the Harmonizing Magician into a Fibrax. So that's why this card is very relevant. It gives it a new layer of summoning outside of the Pendulum summon, which is something Pendulums really need. In addition to that, because we're playing Chaos Ruler and Selene, it's also very nice to have ways to put Pendulums in the graveyard. Like, you wouldn't think that's much of a benefit, but it is very much a benefit of, like, just XE summoning a card like this. Also, because it's a Pendulum monster, and it has a effect where it can, if you can Pendulum summon level 4s, you can just Pendulum summon this. So it's, like, very nice. It's, like, one of the benefits of XEs in this deck, which you wouldn't think it is normally, but having the ability to put Pendulums in your graveyard is very nice. And then Time Star Magician, it's pretty obvious. You could just search any dark spellcaster in the game with it, including, like, Skulker, Bad Joker, or nonsense like Chaos Sorcerer and Dark Magician if you wanted to. But the other effect is, since it can protect your scales from destruction, including your own destruction, at the cost of using Foolish Burial for spellcasters, that's kind of nice. Because, man, sending Tuning Magician with this is kind of stupid. And then Tornado Dragon, it's another rank 4 that can just blow up your scales for free for, like, Blackfang. And again, since it's an XE, if he detaches Dark Spellcaster and it goes to the grave, it just turns Tornado Dragon into an extender, while at the same time keeping the number of bodies up and just being Tornado Dragon on your opponent's turn. So that's pretty nice. Abyss Dweller, pretty obvious. And then Norito. Probably the reason Chronograph is still in here at all. Also, it's just kind of a nice one. Yeah, that's basically it for the XEs. And then for the links. So Artemis is a weird one. Why am I playing this? And that is legitimately for the reason that if you don't have the right scales, but you have a normal summon Magician and a Star Pendulum Graph, you can just turn the Magician into Artemis, trigger the Star Graph to get the scale you want, and then you're totally fine. Yeah, this, like, it gives you no arrow, but it's better to be able to play even if it costs an extra deck slot. That's why this is in here. Fibrax I've already explained. Selene I've already explained as well. So then it's Apollosa, Phoenix, which could be Ignister Prominence if you want, and then Access Code Talker. And that's basically it from the deck. I want to do some combos with this, and maybe even some replays with this, because this is a very nice deck. It's actually really cool, and DB kicked me out because it doesn't like me. But that's a perfect time to end this video. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoyed Timed Out due to inactivity. But yep, that's about it. Thank you all for watching, and remember, Master Dinnerflax will take your soul.